Occasionally on the ACT science test, you'll see a passage that contains the opinions of at least 2, and very rarely 3 or 4 scientists. These passages are called Conflicting Viewpoints Passages, and they test how well you can understand, evaluate, and compare theories. Approach these as you would scientific reasoning passages. Remember, ask reading comp questions as you read, such as, what information supports an idea? What refutes it? Conflicting viewpoints passages require you to understand, evaluate, and compare theories. They may ask you to identify a scientist's viewpoint, to compare and contrast viewpoints, or to identify a detail in the passage. The questions may even go beyond the scope of what was directly stated in the passage, but remember that the correct answers will always be based on what's in the passage. The correct answers will only be a step removed from what is stated. Since these passages contain multiple points of view, always keep straight who said what. Underline each scientist's opinion as you read it. You'll want to be able to find it quickly when you move on to the questions. These passages usually begin with an opening paragraph explaining some general background information about the topic. Then, 2 researchers present their viewpoints on the topic. These passages rarely have figures with them and are always followed by 7 questions. Let's look at the method for conflicting viewpoints passages. First, read the introductory text and the first author's viewpoint. Then answer the corresponding questions when it's still fresh in your mind. Once you've answered all the questions for the first scientist, go back and read the second scientist's opinion and answer the questions relating to it. Finally, answer questions that refer to both. This divide and conquer approach decreases the chances of confusing who said what. One more thing. These passages are often full of technical vocabulary and confusing details that can cost you a lot of time. Remember, don't get lost in the details. You can always go back to the passage to find an answer. After all, the ACT is an open book test. There's no need to memorize the passages. Take a look at an example. The distinction between eukaryotic, nucleated, and prokaryotic, non-nucleated cells is basic to modern biology. The first prokaryotes appeared 2 billion years before the first eukaryotes. Most single-celled organisms, such as bacteria, are prokaryotes, and most complex organisms consist of eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotes contain mitochondria, which are enclosed by inner and outer membranes. It has been suggested that mitochondria-containing eukaryotes evolved from a symbiotic relationship between 2 types of prokaryotes. 2 scientists debate the issue. Scientist 1. Eukaryotes developed from a symbiotic relationship between 2 types of prokaryotes. Early prokaryotes did not require oxygen. There was no free oxygen in Earth's atmosphere until prokaryotes began releasing oxygen as a metabolic byproduct. Eventually, some prokaryotes became aerobic, capable of utilizing free oxygen. They were engulfed by anaerobes, prokaryotes that could not metabolize oxygen. The aerobes gained a secure environment and a continuous food supply, while the anaerobes gained the ability to survive in an oxygen-rich environment. Over time, the symbiotic partners lost their independence, and the aerobic prokaryotes evolved into mitochondria. Mitochondrial DNA differs both genetically and structurally from the DNA in the eukaryotic cell's nucleus. What should you underline as Scientist 1's viewpoint? Scientist 1's viewpoint is her first sentence. Underline it so you can find it quickly. You might also underline her next to last sentence, because it explains how she thinks the relationship came about. On test day, once you've finished reading Scientist 1's viewpoint, check the questions for those that pertain to this part of the passage and answer them. For the purpose of this lesson, let's move on to Scientist 2's opinion. Scientist 2. Mitochondria could not have originated outside of the eukaryotic cell. Although mitochondria synthesize several of the enzymes necessary for their own function, most mitochondrial proteins are controlled by genes in the nucleus of the eukaryotic cell and are synthesized outside of the mitochondria. Mitochondrial DNA and ribosomal proteins differ from those of bacteria. Therefore, mitochondria could not have evolved from aerobic prokaryotes. It is far more likely that eukaryotes developed directly from a single type of prokaryote, and that mitochondria developed from the membrane of that prokaryote. What is Scientist 2's perspective on the origins of mitochondria? Check out that first sentence. Mitochondria could not have originated outside the eukaryotic cell. Very opinionated, and exactly what you should take note of. Also underline the final sentence of the paragraph as further explanation of this scientist's opinion. After you've finished taking notes about scientist 2, move on to the questions that pertain to his opinion and answer them. Finally, move on to questions about both passages. Even though the passage may seem complex, most questions hinge on identifying points of view. You did a great job dissecting this passage, even though it was filled with some confusing scientific jargon. Remember, you don't need to understand the details or complex vocab to get the questions right. The science test is really just testing how well you read. Now apply the Kaplan method and keep straight who said what on some guided practice.